Hi, and welcome to today's edition of Gender Speaker Live, where I'm going to be talking about changing gender and the Gender Recognition Act and the subsequent review and everything else. Hi, and welcome again to the Gender Speaker Live, and we're talking today about the Gender Recognition Act. Now, this all started because this morning I looked at my Twitter notifications and saw that there was a bit of a storm building up with someone from the LGB Alliance. Now, let's be clear, LGB Alliance is not a friendly LGBTQ organization. It's been set up specifically to oppose trans people, but actually not trans people, trans women to be more precise. They are part of the campaign to, as far as possible, get rid of trans rights, all the trans rights that have been gained over the past 20 years. They're really trying their best to roll them all back. Let's just I want to look a little bit about what's going on, because they have very loud voices. They're backed by people like J.K. Rowling, who's got a big platform and a big voice, packed full of misinformation. And I just wish that we could stop this, because when the LGBTQ community is fighting each other, it makes for huge amounts of news, and the very conservative press like the Telegraph, the Times, the Spectator love coming out on this. Even the Guardian has had a go from time to time, using one or two very outspoken anti-trans journalists who have ripped into us unnecessarily so. Now, I'm not saying there aren't some trans people who we would all be grateful if they just kept their mouths shut and stopped stirring things up quite so badly. There are some issues that just simply aren't going to win. And battling on with some of these isn't going to happen. I remember some years back, I had a phone call, because I did a lot of transgender awareness training throughout the Humber, around Hull and East Riding. And I'd done some work for one of the leisure centres, or for leisure centre managers. And somebody phoned me to say, look, we've had a trans woman come in, and we've allowed them into the female changing rooms. And we've had a complaint that they've been standing naked in the middle of the changing rooms, and they haven't had any surgery. What should we do? And I said, well, chuck them out. Just totally and completely inappropriate behaviour. Really, really inappropriate behaviour. There are cubicles in the changing rooms. Ask them to use one of the cubicles. Ask them to use a disabled one. If they haven't had surgery, then be appreciative of the fact that will be very uncomfortable for other women. And no matter how much they think I am a woman, I'm entitled, no, they're not. Okay, I strongly believe that we have to be reasonable, be sensible about our behaviour. Anyway, let's just look at the history of what's been going on here and see if we can pick things up and try and make sense of what's been happened. So, the start of all this, Corbett versus Corbett, April Ashley's divorce in 1970. April got married to Lord Arthur Corbett, I think in 1961, on a very long-lasting marriage, about 6 days from what I can work out. But anyway, April was extraordinarily beautiful. She was a showgirl. She lived and worked in Paris quite a lot. I think the Moulin Rouge, or one of the big Paris shows. Anyway, she's a very, very beautiful woman. And of course, that made a lot of news, a lot of press got into it, because she was one of the first women in the United Kingdom to undergo gender reassignment surgery in Casablanca. So when it came to her divorce, Arthur Corbett was worth a few bob. It was family money. I don't know the exact amount. I think it was only actually a few million, but by today's standards, that would have been a massive sum of money. And the family weren't happy about that, so they organised to try and battle against this. And they discovered that despite changing her gender, April had never actually legally changed her gender. She changed her sex, she changed her everything about her, and she was definitely an extraordinarily beautiful woman. But legally, she was still a boy, still male. And so they went to the House of Lords, where Lord Ormond made a unbelievably firm decision. No one can change their sex, he said. Absolutely not possible for anyone to change their sex, no matter what they do. Well, that was it. For the next 35 years, battle after battle went on trying to get this change. But in the British legal system, the way it works is that when a high court makes a decision, all courts at the same level and below have to adhere to that decision unless they can show that the case is substantially different to the one where the previous decision was made. It's called precedence. The House of Lords, now the Supreme Court, was the highest court. So the only people who could override that decision was Parliament. And trying to get Parliament to even make space or time to consider this was not really very good. So there was one other option. Just after the war, Britain set up the Council of Europe. 48 countries signed up to try to act in a way that would prevent what had happened with Germany ever happening again, particularly the treatment of Jews and the horrible breaches of human rights. And largely based upon what had been done in the United Nations with the International Charter on Human Rights, we created a European Charter of Human Rights and set up a court, the European Court of Human Rights, to enforce those rules. So anyone in the United Kingdom who feels that their human rights have been breached can go off to the European Court of Human Rights. You'll need a couple of $100,000 to do it and a few years wait. But you can go to the European Court of Human Rights and you can challenge British law if you feel that British law in some way breaches your human rights. Well, Christine Goodwin and somebody who remained nameless but called I went off, helped by Press for Change and a big funding campaign to challenge the decision in the UK that you could not change gender, therefore could not get married, therefore could not be treated for pensions. All those rights from changing gender were not there. And the European Court of Human Rights in 2002 said, no, this is wrong. You've got to change your law. And Britain was one of only 4 countries in the whole of Europe that hadn't actually changed its law. There was Ireland, there was Malta, there was a very, very tiny state, I can't remember which one it was, Andorra, I think, and then Britain did not have gender recognition law in place. So in 2004, as a result primarily of that European Court of Human Rights decision, Britain brought in a Gender Recognition Act. Quite trailblazing at the time in terms of what it allowed and what it did. Most importantly, you didn't have to have surgery in order to change your gender. That was the real shift. So it's still, there was a lot of argument about it. Let me just show you what you had to do in order to change your gender, because I went through this whole process in 2006 and I got my gender recognition certificate. Once you have a gender recognition certificate, you can then change your birth certificate, which I actually haven't done because at the time I was born in Malta. And at the time I checked with Malta and they said, well, we don't know what to do with this yet. And their plan was that they would take my old birth certificate, cross out boy and write girl. And I thought, well, that's not exactly the level of privacy I was looking for. I wanted so I haven't done it. They've now changed all the laws and actually much more, but actually even better than the UK. So I might go there and try. Might even see if I can get a passport as well while I'm there. But Brexit's another story. Anyway, so here we are. In order to change your gender, what you have to do is to live for 2 years in your inquired gender. Largely, they tend to count that 2-year period from the point at which you change your legal identity. Now, that can be simply changing your passport, changing your driving license, which can be done. You don't need a gender recognition certificate to change your passport or change your driving license. Best to do it with the passport first. What you do need is a letter from your doctor to say that you have been diagnosed with gender dysphoria and that your change in gender looks as if it's going to be a permanent change. What they don't want is people swapping backwards and forwards and changing their passport from year to year. It's about making a permanent decision to change your gender. And that's really important to remember, because that's the crucial bit that the anti-trans lobby seem to have omitted to mention. This isn't about somebody getting up one morning and think, I think today I'll be a woman. No, this is about a long thought out process deciding to make a change. Now, at the moment, I say this is you've got to live for 2 years in your acquired gender. And they will usually count that from the issue of the passport, because that says, yeah, this is it. Now, I'll be honest, when I first changed gender, it was a while before I changed my passport, and I went off to holiday in Spain, dressed and looking pretty much the same as I am now, a few years younger, but with a male passport. I was with my son. And as I went to go through, actually it was coming back, that was the problems. I was coming out. He said, you have your son's passport? I said, no, I don't. He said, you have your son's passport? I said, no, I don't. And he said, go on. So he let me through. But I was due to go to America shortly after that. I thought, you know what? If I'm starting to have a problem in Spain, which is actually very flexible, they had good gender recognition laws, I thought I may have, this was obviously post 9/11, I thought it might be that was the point at which I changed my passport. And all I needed was a letter from a psychiatrist, a gender specialist, to say this person is gender dysphoric and is undergoing a long-term change of gender. Fill in the application form, send it off and do it. And if you're transgender, that's all you got to do. It's just check on the government website. You'll find, if you just look at how do I change my gender on my passport, all the details are there, exactly what you need to put together to make it work. You also need to change your name. Now, if you haven't got a passport changed before you apply for gender recognition, you will need a deed poll. You don't have to pay for those. You can get a template offline. You can online. You can fill in the blanks. Just get somebody to sign it, your doctor, somebody who knows you, and that's it. It needs one signature to say, yeah, this person. You do not have to go spend £50 or £150 with a solicitor ripping you off for a deed poll. It's free. Honestly, you can do these for free. Anybody wants to talk to me about that, just drop me a message and I'll try and help. So now here's the challenge. You need 2 medical practitioners to sign the application. One of those has to be a gender specialist, which means unless you're on the care path at the Leeds Gender Identity Clinic or one of the gender identity clinics, Charing Cross, you're going to struggle to get a gender specialist to sign the form. And if you haven't had surgery, you're going to have to convince them about why you haven't had surgery in order to get them to sign the form. And that's part of the problem. It is not necessary to have surgery, but we need medical practitioners to sign it and give a reason why you haven't gone ahead with surgery. Now, to be honest, the reason right now could be a huge, long waiting list, because, I was in a waiting list for 10 years. I actually gave up eventually. It just took so long and the doctors were so bad. I had a friend who is put in a wheelchair as a result of gender surgery, and I thought, I was over 60 and I thought, I don't need this. So I've had hormone treatment and a whole bunch of other things, but here's the thing. Surgery is not required. You've got to explain why, but surgery is not required. I have a legal document saying I must be treated as female. You do not need to have surgery. It's not an essential requirement. You then submit the application along with a £140 fee. And bear in mind, you've probably already had to pay for letters from doctors, and you've had to pay for statutory declaration. Oh, forgot about that. You have to add a statutory declaration. So you've got to get your solicitors to set that up. You can do it yourself, and you can get the forms in the pack that comes from the gender panel. But often people end up going to their solicitor, getting it sorted out. You can pop then to the magistrate's court and swear it in front of a magistrate. Just give them a call and go in there. But can you see the difficulty? So this is what's happened. If you're married, you can't just do it. Well, when I did my gender recognition, I was already divorced. But at the time, had I been married, I would have had to have got divorced before I could get my gender recognition certificate. And if I wanted to stay with my partner, I would have then had to have a civil partnership. Then we changed all that. We've got same-sex marriages. So here is the situation. If I'm married and I go for a gender recognition certificate, my partner has the right to veto my application. Or the marriage has to be dissolved. So if they don't agree to it, I've got to dissolve the marriage before I can make the application and get the final gender recognition certificate. There's one or two people don't like that because it puts a huge amount of power into the hands of a partner. At the same time, I can understand how partners might say, well, yeah, I married a man or married a woman, and yeah, I don't want to be married to the other gender. I don't want to be in that kind of relationship. That's not my identity. And that's fine. If it's a civil partnership, so if a trans person is already in a civil partnership with somebody the same as their birth gender, and they then change gender, making them now opposite gender, and therefore it would be a heterosexual marriage, they can't have a civil partnership. You're not allowed to have a civil partnership if you are opposite genders. So civil partnership has to either be dissolved or converted to a marriage. Can you see how complex and difficult this whole thing is? It really is a bit of a challenge. Now, a lot of these things are not going to get changed because there are other laws impact on. The Equality Act impacts on this. The Same-Sex Marriage Act. All these different things impact. The civil partnership regulations all impact on what's happening to somebody when they change gender. Lots of argument about this, and therefore in 2015 and then again in 2018, the government, the Minister for Equalities and Women, decided, Maria, I've forgotten her name for a minute now, but anyway, there's been so many of them. It changed so many times over this period. And this has been the most turbulent time in British politics for a long, long time. So for some reason, they suddenly said, oh, we'll do this. We'll do a review. And they did the review. I did a big LGBT survey, and everybody seemed to be indicating that they thought, yeah, making it easier for trans people will be a good thing. And then it came out that they were talking about self-identification. I mean, let's scrap all of this going to medical practice and everything else. Self-identification is available in Ireland, in Denmark, in Malta, and a whole bunch of different countries have moved to a simple principle of self-identification. In fact, interestingly, mostly quite Catholic countries have actually said, no, let's just go to simple self-identification. We don't need to have, if you don't require surgery, why do you have to have medical practitioners support it? So what they've done is this then kicked off a whole big anti-trans battle. It started in 2015. It happened to coincide with the huge sort of the heightening of presence of trans women following Caitlyn Jenner coming out, and suddenly her being nominated Woman of the Year. That really, really irritated a lot of the radical feminists, the gender critical feminists. They've been called TERFs by some, although they consider that to be quite a slur. What I'm talking about is people who just don't like trans people. They don't accept and acknowledge that anyone can change gender. And it's not about trans men. They barely mention trans men. It's all about people who were born male, transitioning to women, and they refuse to accept any notion that somebody who was a man can become a woman, and therefore want to make sure that we are excluded from all female space. We shouldn't be allowed in women's toilets. We shouldn't be allowed in changing rooms. We shouldn't be allowed to access rape centres. We shouldn't be allowed to access women's centres. The thing is, there is no evidence of trans women ever being a problem in these. Now, I'm going to say ever. I am sure there are one or two loonies out there who have done things which would be inappropriate. I am aware of trans women who have been sent to prison for rape as men or attempted rape and then been transferred to female prisons. But I looked into a couple of these and it's looked very much as if they had been set up. I don't actually know, but one particular trans woman had gone to prison initially because she killed her abusive boyfriend. He had been beating her up. So she was sent to prison. When she came out, she went into a female bail centre and within 24 hours was rearrested for attempted rape and went back into prison because this was a breach of license. She's actually in a long-term prison. Now, she was eventually got a gender recognition certificate and was transferred to a female prison. and I understand is now in a relationship with a woman there. But everybody was up in arms about this without really understanding the stories behind it. And this is what happens. Stories get twisted and turned in order to be used and weaponized against people. So this is where we go. Let's have a look. The main opposition for this is about male to female trans people. People like myself arguing that I should not be allowed to use female toilets, should not be allowed to access rape centre. Let me tell you, I was actually on the board of a rape crisis centre supporting and helping women. I know trans women who've needed to access rape centres because they were raped. I know trans women who have been in abusive relationships and have been beaten senseless by abusive boyfriends. I also know women who've been beaten and harmed by female partners. Yeah, you can't deal with abuse through gender recognition law. That is not the right way. There's nothing in the gender recognition law about trying to help and support or trying to deal with the issues of abuse, whether that's by men or whether that's by women. And I fully understand the bulk of abuse is by men, and that has to be tackled. We have to teach men not to abuse. Somehow we still allow it in our society. We still, if you watch movies, you can see all the time, boys acting in a completely inappropriate behavior for a bit of a laugh. Now, I've been watching 13 Reasons Why recently. I don't know if any of you have seen that. But a lot of that is about rape and abuse and the way in which boys abuse girls, and it's just allowed to happen. But of course, in there, we've seen boys being abused by the same boys in a similar way. There are no trans characters in that series, but let's tackle problems. People have problems. It doesn't matter what their gender is. They have problems. They are abused. They're beaten up. They're raped. They are sexually abused, as I was when I was 12. So I'm not going to get into that right now. We'll talk about it later. So there we go. The argument against us is that men would use the GRA to provide them with access to women's spaces. Oh, come on. It isn't going to be the overnight thing. I've already said that. What man is going to go through the complicated process of changing gender in order to access women's spaces and therefore abuse women? They don't need to do that. They can just walk in anyway. There is no law that says only men and only women can go to any particular toilet. Not in this country anyway. If men want to abuse, the laws on this will not stop them from doing it. We have to deal with that differently. We have to deal with that and focus on dealing with it. But trans women don't do that. Trans women want to be accepted as women. Trans men want to be accepted as men and get on with their lives. They don't even want anyone to notice them. And the reality is that most trans women will just pass, go to the toilet, do their business, come out, and no one will even be the wiser. Because most of the time, we can't see. It's only when somebody has transitioned late in life, they've got a deep voice, they've got very male characteristics, that we suddenly start to notice them. This is an unbelievably ridiculous battle that is going on that's become incredibly toxic. I wish it would just stop and people would look and realize we're talking about vulnerable people trying to get regulations put in place so that they can get on with their lives peacefully. And I'm going to say pretty much all trans women are not the slightest bit interested in abusing other women. They actually abuse themselves. They just want to not be noticed, blend in, and get on. Okay, been a little bit longer today than it usually is. It's a big topic. It's getting me a little bit annoyed when I'm watching all these attacks against us by people who should understand and should know better. And what they're doing is just repeating and regurgitating the same old rhetoric that's coming out from a few people who just seem to hate trans people, trans women in particular, refuse to accept or acknowledge that we've changed gender, always use the wrong pronouns, constantly dead name, using our previous names where they can get hold of it, do everything they can to humiliate and make us look awful. Just try to paint the picture of trans women as predatory men dressed in women's clothes. We are not. And most people who know trans women know that we're not. Okay. Thanks for listening on today. Been a little bit of a rant. I look forward to seeing you tomorrow. Take care.